Welcome back to MDL Crochet for our weekly item make tutorial. This week is going to be this shirt. This shirt is the 1986 Tunisian Magic shirt. It is a shirt that I took and was able to convert from regular crochet to Tunisian from Back a Day Crochet. She allowed me to do it. What I used was the Lucky Brand bamboo in the color Dijon, and this color is called washed blue. I used about 7 of these cakes, which is 310 yards in each cake, and I used a 5.5mm needle, cable to Tunisian needle. And you make this shirt in panels. You make 2 front panels the exact same size, then you make the back panels, which I will include all the measurements in the description that you're going to need for your different sizes, as well as panels for the sleeves. And then you just, once your panels are all made to the measurements you need, then you just stitch it all together. And we walk through that. And with that all being said, let's get to it. Alright, so this is what I did, is I took my bottom panel and I laid it flat with the front facing up. Because you know with Tunisian there's 2 sides. There's a front and there's a back. So I laid it with the back laying down, the front facing up. Then I took the side panels. The side panels, I laid them to where the front is facing the other front and the back is facing up. And I did that with both, and I went ahead and I marked or used stitch markers to hold them into place, so that way I know that's the way. It's technically inside out. So that's how you're going to want to do this, is inside out. And then another thing I went ahead and I did is after I roughly pinned everything where I wanted it to be, I went ahead and I measured 3 inches in from this side, from the inside at the top corner, 3 inches in, and that's going to, and I put a stitch marker right there, because when I'm sewing, that's where I'm going to stop, because this helps form where we can do our collar. And what I also did is I matched up the bottom chain with bottom chain. The top chain with top chain is going to be at the bottom, so the stitch is going to be upside down, which doesn't matter for this stitch because it looks the same either way. Now for the other stitches, you're going to want to put top to top, bottom to bottom, because they do matter. This doesn't matter with this net stitch because it looks exactly the same either way. Doesn't take away from the stitch. Now there's one thing I didn't do for this shirt. The one thing I didn't do is I didn't make a pocket. And all that has to deal with is because of how holy this stitch is. There wouldn't be a lot of give or foundation for the pocket to hold on to, and it would be stretched, and I didn't really want that. This stitch is a very beautiful stitch, so that's why I wanted to use this stitch for this shirt. Now if you want to use a pocket, you can use this, you can do this in any stitch you want to do it in, as long as your numbers add up. In the description box I will be putting a rough estimate of your sizes. And of course these are rough. So what we're going to start doing is we're going to start sewing the top. Now like I said, I put the stitch markers in there for me. You may want to do the same. And I am using, this entire project was made in the Lucky Brand bamboo. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out a good amount of bamboo. And I'm using a darning needle, and mine is curved, which is not a big deal. It's going to help me while I'm sitting here filming this. With all this in the way, I'll be able to see what I'm doing, and it'll help me do it. So I'm going to go ahead and thread the needle. Move my scissors. So with Tunisian, as you know, just like regular crochet, your chain has your base chain and your top close off chain all have these chevrons. Now these chevrons are what you're going to want to go through, and it's going to be hard at some points to find the exact chevron, because this is where I already woven in my end, so it kind of, it's going to be a little hard at the end, at that side. But a rough estimate is all that matters. As long as your shirt's not going to come out wrinkly when you're sewing it up, you're good. Let me take my stitch marker off. That one was on there good, wasn't it? Oh my goodness, it's still on there. There we go. And I threaded a good amount, so that way I can come back through and double sew. I like strength. And in my opinion, seams give it strength. I'm in the same boat as Crystal is on this. She likes seams, she likes strength. She thinks it gives it strength, and it does. In my honest opinion, it does. So we're going to just sew these up. You could also crochet a slip stitch all the way through to sew it up, but I don't like that because it tends to bunch up the work. So I'm going to do it this way. So I'm going to be speeding it up. And again, we're just catching the chevrons. That's all you're going through. And that is pretty much how you're going to sew this for every aspect. I'm going to go ahead and continue sewing this panel and the other panel, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the next important step, which is the sleeves. So I'll keep it running for a few more minutes. But this is really all you're doing, is just going through the chevrons from your base chain, because that's what we're working on. You're going through them and you're just making them, you're just stitching them and making them happy. That is it. And sometimes you may have to turn it a little bit just so you can see where you got to go. And that's fine. Like I always say, make your work work for you and not you for your work. That's going to be a lifesaver for you. It's going to cut down on a lot of movement, and your hands and your head and your body will thank you. I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, get these two done, and we'll move on to the next spot, because this is just very, very repetitive, and it is very time consuming. And if I was to film the entire thing, this video would end up being 3-4 hours long. So I'll meet back up with you all when we get these two top panels done, which is this side and this side. And remember to leave yourself a 3-inch gap on both sides to where that's where you're stopping. And then if you left yourself like I'm doing, I like to go back through again enough to where you just double the sew. Just remember to stop here at your 3-inch mark. So I'll be back in just a moment, and then we'll move to the next aspect. Be right back. Alright, so when you're doing your panels together, I would suggest when you're sewing them together to start from the outside, work your way in sewing together, and then come back so you can tie off and weave in your ends. And it reinforces your seam. As you can see, my seam is right there, and you can see how it's a great looking seam. So what you're going to do now is remember everything is done as you're working on with the back of the project up, because Tunisian has two sides, the stitch side and the back side. Now with this stitch, both sides are beautiful. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the end of the sleeve that I did my close off on. That's the end I'm actually going to stitch to the outside of the panel. And we're going to do that again facing up, with the back facing up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to measure. We need to measure and get as close to the center as we can, which for this panel is roughly about here, where it's pretty much at. Wow, I did pretty good there, didn't I? So what we're going to start doing is we're going to get our needle threaded, and you're just going to continue sewing it like you did prior. Same aspect. Give yourself a good amount of yarn, and go ahead and thread your needle. Now again, I am using a curved one. That way I can do this a little bit better on camera for you guys. Go ahead and thread it. Give yourself some leeway. And while we're here, so let's get this all measured out and put into place. Okay. And it's approximate. And we know right about here is our center, which is approximate, right? And then what we're going to do is, before you start your sewing, and I find this easy for me, it may not be as easy for you, but of course, do what's easy for yourself. I'm going to go ahead and stitch mark, pin it all together. I'm going to start with the center. So I know this is my center. And then I'm just going to work my way down, stitch mark pinning everything together. And alternating my sides so that way I'm going to be even throughout. And just pin everything. I mean, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Those little imperfections, I think, add character to your project. They enhance it, in my opinion. But that's just me. I know some of you guys will disagree with that, and that's fine. Everybody's different, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and continue my pinning. And then you can do the exact same thing to the other side. Now that it's pinned in place, it's not going to go nowhere. I need to pull up some more stitch markers. And then I'm going to flip it around so we can get to the other side, do our measurement, put it where it's close to center, and then pin it into place. Perfect. Just got to scoot it down a little bit and we can pin it into place, and then we can start sewing again. And you're going to just sew it like you did the top seam. Give yourself enough leeway and enough room to do the top seam or the seam so you can work back twice. Work forward and then back. And then you can close off, tie, and weave in the ends. I would suggest to weave both ends on the side of the sleeve instead of splitting them, because the friction, the movement could wiggle it looser. But I'm going to go ahead and pin these all into place. Alright, now those are all pinned. So you're going to take your threaded needle and you're going to start working. Now, because we're working on with Tunisian with the top to the side, you may have to put a couple of stitches in each top because the tops are a little bit smaller than the sides when you're doing your close off. So you may have to go through twice, and you may not. It all depends on you and how you want it to look. The seam will come out great regardless. Just keep everything lined up, make sure nothing moves, and everything will be good to go. And you, like I said, you seam it the same way you seamed the front panel to the back. And remember, everything is always facing backwards up. The back of it is facing up. And again, with Tunisian, it is easy to tell where the back is. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch these up off camera. And then we'll be back. Then do the next part. Alright, now that your sleeves are stitched on, now we're still going to keep everything inside out. We still want to work with the back. Now you're going to line everything up, and you're going to end up start sewing all the way down. And everything will line and work out. Now, I also want you to remember this. When you're stitching here at the armpit, you're going to want to put in a couple of extra stitches, because the armpit, it's the rubbing, the friction, as well as the torque when they lift up arms. So you can do that. Please put a couple extra in there, and then just go all the way down and do it on both sides. And it'll be simple, it's easy, it'll go fast, and if you have everything right, guess what? Everything's going to line up. Everything should line up. So I'm going to go ahead and get to stitching. I'll be back, and we'll look at it, and then we'll start going to the next step in this Tunisian shirt. I'll be back in just a few. Alright, so we have our shirt seamed, and as you can see, the seams are really nice. They will work out on their own. Everything is seamed up, and everything is good to go. Now the next part we're going to be doing is we need to put a slight border all the way around. So that way when we do our border color and change, one, it's not pulling on the stitch, and it would look odd with a different color doing that. So we're going to change that up a little bit. We're going to do just a foundation row all the way around, and then also on the sides, because when you are trying to work vertically on a piece that's horizontal, your rows are shorter when you're building them that way, or each stitch is shorter than the row is width. So you will have to end up putting 2 in here, and I'll show you how to do that. But we're going to start over on the other side, and we're going to start pulling up our stitches. And I ended up adding a longer cable to my hook, so that way I could pull up these stitches. And the way you're going to do the stitches, you can see how we have, this is technically the top of the fabric. So what I ended up doing is stitching the bottom to the back and flipping them, just flipping them, so that way, because with this stitch, it doesn't matter which way it faces, they're both the exact same way. So if it's facing down or if it's facing up, the stitch is exactly the same. Now if it was a knit stitch, it would change the direction of the knits, but with this stitch, it changes nothing. It's exactly the same. So what we're going to do is, underneath that chain we have that row, and we're just going to pull up, go into the very first, poke through, grab your yarn, and just pull up a loop. Don't make it tight. Try to make it as loose as you can to a point. And we're just pulling up a foundation row. That is all we're doing. So we have to go in between every one of these stitches, and we're doing it in the very last row that was part of this. And you're going to just pull them up. That's all we're going to be doing, because we need them, so that way when we get ready to start our border, we are fine. And you're going to treat it like it's a full stitch. That's how you're going to be pulling them up. You're not going into the stitch, you're not continuing the stitch, you're just wanting to pull up your loops. So you're going to be doing it as it's a full stitch. So I'm going to see if I can get this really good here. So here's a stitch and here's a stitch. You're just going in between them and pull up your loop. Let me get that tail out of the way. That was a long tail. Goodness gracious. And just pull up your loop. Here's your stitch, and there's your next stitch. You're just going in between, just like a full stitch. And pull up that loop. And you can see the next one. It's right there. And that's all we're doing all the way down. Be careful of the stitches that are already in. That way you don't mess them up. And you're just doing a foundation row, really. So I'm going to go ahead and continue pulling up these loops, and I will be right back. Alright, so we have all of our loops pulled up. And what we're going to end up doing is, we still have our end stitch to do. So just drop down and go where we normally would go. And that's how we're going to pull this loop up. You need to make sure you're in the right row. Don't go down too far. But you need to make sure you're in the right row, and just do your normal end stitch, pull up a loop, and then you're going to yarn over, chain one, and then you're going to continuously yarn over and pull through two, yarn over, pull through two, and yarn over, pull through two, all the way down to the end till you only have that one stitch on. Now this is our foundation row that we're using to help build our trim or border, however you want to describe it. And this is going to make everything work together, because if we were to pull this up with our other color, it would look a little odd. So we're just going to do it this way. And when we get to the sides, we're going to handle the side panels a little different, because we're going to have to build up differently on those. And I'll show you how we're going to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and continue pulling through two. So I'll see you all in just a moment. Alright, so how we're going to do this now is we're finishing up the last few stitches. We want to end here for right now. Pull that back through. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut off a decent tail. Man, those scissors weren't there. They're sharp, but so we're going to cut off a decent tail. We're going to chain one, just pull it through and tie it off. Alright, so we just finished our bottom. We did a single row of Tunisian simple stitch without a close off. So now we got to do all the way up the panels to the collar and then back down. So for this, I did change out to a longer cable. This one is a swivel cable. And how we're going to handle this is pretty much how we handled the bottom. We're going to start where we would normally do our close off, or our end row closure, and just pull up a loop. Let's get that tail out of the way. And we're just going to pull up our loop. And then we're just going to be pulling loops up in every single one of these aspects here. And that's all we're going to be doing. Be mindful of your tension. And we're just going to do this all the way up. And then when we get to the corner down here, how you're going to handle this is pretty much we're going to be putting 3 simple stitches here to help us do a curve. And then we're going to handle this a little different. And I'm going to show you how to do all that. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up these stitches. And we're doing simple stitch because the row of simple stitches pretty much, it's like a foundation row. That's exactly what we're doing, again, because this is what's going to help with our color change. We could start our color change right now. We didn't have to do none of this, but I wanted to do this. I think it's going to give you that little bit of a transition between your color change and your main product. I think it's going to give you a really good buffer zone between your color change and your main project. So I'm going to pull these all up, and then I'll be right back when we get to the corner. Alright, so we're here at the last stitch. So we're going to go ahead and just pull up a loop. There goes number 1. Going to go through one of the side stitches, which is number 2, and then through the top, which is number 3. And then for the side here, the V, we're going to handle it how we handled the bottom. Is we're going to go through where the stitches are. You can see where your stitches go, and then you just got to split it up, and you're splitting the stitches. Try to go where you see your chains. That's where we need to try to be able to be, so that way they're even and you're putting the right amount of stitches in there. So if you're even with your chain, you're going to be even with your stitches. Now, you could work through the actual chain itself, but this is your base chain. Because I sewed them on back kind of in reverse, because down here would be the top of the panel, and then where I sewed everything up here is the base chain, which would be your bottom. But because of this stitch, it doesn't matter which way it actually goes. I did it this way because if you ever see your close-offs, they're a little bit harsh, and I think it would make the collar and your side panels where you're going to be putting your buttons and stuff pretty harsh. So I thought the smoother sides, which is the base chain, would make it easier. Plus they were easier to sew into. So again, just continue. It's going to be a little awkward just because of we're doing one continuous all the way to the opposite side. So we're going to try to counter that as much as we can just by holding our work differently. And remember, like I said, just go where your base chain is and you're going to get the right amount of stitches. And it's going to come out looking fantastic. Now we're almost at the, I guess you could call it this little part here. And I'm going to show you how we're going to handle that. Alright, this is the last one, and let me get my little handy dandy pointer, which is just a green plastic darning needle. Now you have a stitch. Okay, this is the seam. That is the seam stitch. I'm going to put another one in there so we can keep it in view all the time. So there's the seam stitch. Well, we have a chain before it and one right after it. And how we're going to work it is we're going to work 2 in here and then 2 in here. 2 simple stitches here and 2 simple stitches here. Leave this alone. That's your seam. So how we're going to do this, okay, and go through the top of one of these V's, because you have the V's, the chain. You're just going to go through the top of it and pull up a loop, pull it through, and then you're going to go through the gap. It's right below it, and pull up a loop. Now we got our 2 there. Now we have to go to the other side. The other side, we're going to go through the top again. We're going from underneath through the top, pull up a loop, and then go right below the gap of where that chain is. It's a little hard to tell on this side, but it's there, trust me. And then pull up a loop. Now you just put 2 in there. That's going to help give you the curve that we're looking for. And you're going to do that exactly on this side as well. And then you're going to put 3 in this last stitch right here. It's a little loose because I was working with it a minute ago, because I wanted to make sure everything was looking right, and it is. So we're going to continue just evening out our stitches with the chain, and be careful of splits, because you know, yarn splits, and it will look pretty bad. This bamboo is kind of splitty, so I apologize about that, but I love the color. I'm going to continue pulling up these stitches, and then I'll meet you at the end where we started our foundation row around the bottom, and I'll show you how we're going to mess with this. I'll be there in just a moment. Alright, I'm on the last few stitches right now before we get to the end. Now I'm at the end. It slipped right off my needle. And how I'm going to handle this is I'm just going to go through the sidebars. That's how you're going to do it. You got the 2 sidebars right there. You're just going to go underneath it and pull up your loop. That is all there is. And that's how simple it is. One more time, just go through the side loop. You got the 2 V's right there. Just go to that sidebar, kind of like you're doing a full stitch. But just pull up that loop. And there we go. And then it's chain 1, then yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2 repetitively until you only have that 1 loop left on your hook, and then we can do our close off, and then we'll start the next aspect of the shirt, which is going to be our sleeves. Now I will be back when we get ready to bind off this area from around the front and neck, and then we'll move on to the sleeves. Alright, I'll be right back. Alright, I'm going to be pulling through the last few loops now. Getting through the last loop. So we're going to go ahead and chain 1 and go ahead and snip our yarn. We're going to pull through. And this is the time, if you have any tails, to go ahead and weave in your tails, because we're about to start the sleeve. So I'm going to weave in these tails and I'll be right back. Alright, so we're at the sleeve now. I traded my cable Tunisian hook for a double-ended Tunisian in the round hook. This is a 5.5. It is a clover. I am using, again, the Lucky Brand Bamboo and Dijon, and my trim color is Lucky Brand Bamboo, and it's called Washed Blue. So we're going to start where the seam is in the back, and you're just going to put your needle right where the seam, where you seamed. And we're doing it in the round, so you're going to need to pull from the center and from the outside, unless you want to open up a whole new ball of the yarn. And you're just going to go around the entire circle, pulling up your loops until you can't get any more on your needle. And then we're going to add our return pass to it. And I'll show you how to do that. So let me go ahead and pull up my loops. Now, the reason why we didn't do our main color border here is because the sleeves don't need the help. This needed the help because we're working on the side and we needed to be able to change our angle of our stitch. So the reason why I added the extra down here at the bottom was so that we could, otherwise if we didn't, there would be a line of our main color and it would look awkward. So that's why I added this extra line down here for the bottom. Otherwise it would look awkward. And I know people aren't going to be paying attention to the shirt, but you would. And I know it would drive you nuts, especially if you're like I am, and when you see things that are awkward, or you even know things are awkward, but it's not noticeable to anybody else, it's going to drive you nuts. So might as well fix it ahead of the game, you know? So I'm going to go ahead and we're just about ready to start casting off, actually. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip our work, because we were working this way. We're going to flip our work, grab the second end, and it's the outside is what I'm grabbing of your color. Tie your knot, your slip knot. Like I said, I do slip knots. You don't have to. You can just lay it in there. Make sure it's going to face inside. So let's flip our knot around. There we go. And go ahead and tighten it up. And throw those into the sleeve, because you can handle those here in a minute. Or here later when we get done. So what we're going to do is we're going to just chain one. Boom. And then we're going to just yarn over and pull through two. Like a standard return pass. Just we're stopping, and we're stopping when we're stopping when we only have 4 loops left on our hook. This is our last one. And then we're just going to flip our work back around, tighten that back up a little bit, and continue pulling up loops again. One thing we can also do right now is take a stitch marker. Doesn't matter. Just take a stitch marker and put it on that very first stitch. And the reason why we're doing that is we're marking where we're going to start the next row, next row, next row. Okay, I'm going to continue pulling up these loops. Alright, I'm going to continue pulling up these loops until we get to the end, and then we'll just build up. And once we start our second row, we're going to turn those into reverse stitches. So I'll see you there in just a moment. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and we're at the end, right? So you're going to go into the back bar of where you put your stitch marker, and you're going to go into the back bar of every one of these loops, and that is the Tunisian reverse stitch. And we're going to do this for a total of 4 rows. And a row is every time you put one in that's even with your stitch marker. And then we'll do the whole close off. Oh, the yarn is trying to split on me. There we go. And you don't have to do it in the reverse stitch. I just thought with this stitch that the reverse stitch would be a nice little complementary stitch to go with it. You could do it in any stitch you want to do it in. I just chose the reverse. This yarn is splitty. That's the thing you have to watch out for on these bamboos. Regardless of the type of hook you're working with. Well, cottons are the same way. Some good cottons. Let me trim that down. Let me sharpen those. And cotton's the same way. It can be pretty splitty as well, but you know, you just got to be careful with what you're using, because you're using it because either you can only afford it or you like the look of it. And I do like the look of this Lucky Brand bamboo. There we go. I was having a problem with that stitch, but I got it. So just continue all the way around until you have 4 completed rows, and then we'll come back and we'll do the close off. Alright, so we are technically finishing up on our last row. I'm going to do the finish pull through or return pass, whatever you want to call it. And then we're going to close this off, and we're going to close it off in the stitch that's used. So how we're going to do this is you're going to go through all these loops except for the last one. Got a little loosey. There we go. You're going to go through all the stitches but the last one, and then you're going to chain 1, and then you're going to snip your yarn, pull it through, and tighten it down. It's not going to go nowhere. Fold that all in the back because you're going to weave that in. My needle fell out, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten all this back up. There we go. Oh, I lost it. Okay, so how we're going to do this is we're going to do like we're pulling up a reverse stitch and we're slipping it off. That is it. And then when you get back around to it, you'll just slip stitch it and knot it off, Weave them and you're done. Now remember, you still have another sleeve to do. So you'll do this twice. This is the easiest part of this whole shirt, is doing this sleeve. And doing it in the stitch, I think, really gives it a nice little cool and smooth finish. We'll pull it all the way through. Alright, so we're going to pull up and just continue pulling up your reverse stitch and slipping it off. And I'll meet you at the end. Alright, we're doing the last slip stitching now. And how we're going to do this now? How are we going to make it even? Well, we're going to go, here's the middle. So we're going to go right between it, pull up a loop, and don't lose your needle, but you're going to pull up a loop and just slip it off. You're going to do that one more time. Sorry, the yarn was starting to slip out of my hand. Do it one more time. Just, I like, if you followed my tutorials before, I like extras. So go ahead and do your chain, snip your yarn, pull through, tighten it down, and there we are. That is the reverse stitch for your border. Now we got one more sleeve to do, so we're going to do that. But while you're here, you can go ahead and weave in your ends before you move on. I like to weave them as I go on this project. Blankets and whatnot, I really don't weave them until I'm done. And then, I kick myself in the hind end because I got all these tails to mess with. But we're all that way, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do the other sleeve, and then we're going to come back and talk about the rest of the shirt. I'll be back in just a moment. Alright, so we went ahead and finished our sleeves. Both sleeves are done. And I think the reverse stitch matches really well with the net stitch. So now what I ended up doing is I laid out my tape measure, and around 2 inches from both top and from bottom, I measured and I placed the buttons, and then I spaced them out evenly after that. And I put stitch markers to correspond where they're at. The reason why we put the stitch markers is because that's where we're going to be making our buttonholes on this side, which would be your, as you would be wearing it, it's your right side. And so I put the stitch markers there because that's how we're going to do where we're going to be putting our buttonholes. Now, how we're going to handle this is we're going to start on the opposite side. We're not going to go all the way around and then back up. We're just going to do one side at a time. And what we're going to do, bear with me as I move this around real quick. So we're going to start in the corner, and we're just going to pull up our accent color. And we're going to do several rows, and we're going to be stopping just to measure the width for a button, because then we'll know how many rows we need to do when we get to the other side, and then down at the bottom, instead of just guesstimating and going with it. So we're still going to be doing the reverse stitch. And we're going to just pull it up like we normally would. I'm not going to tie off this time like I normally would. I'm just going to start at the corner. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start at this corner. And we're going to start it in the back. We're going to go ahead and put our needle through, pull up our loop, and just leave it hanging a little bit. Leave you enough of a tail so you can tie off. So pull up your loop and then do that all the way down. And you're going to do several rows and taking your buttons to measure of where you're at, because that is going to be how many rows you need to do for your buttons to make them stand where they're at. And you'll do this for several rows. Go all the way down to the corner and then back up. So that way you'll have, and then stopping, making sure you have the width for your buttons, because that is going to give us the number of rows for the opposite side, and we'll know to stop in the middle to do the buttonhole. And I'll show you how we do the buttonhole when we get there. But go ahead and pull up your loops in the reverse stitch all the way down to the corner and back, and do that for however many rows that this would be wide. And that's going to change per person because of your yarn. It's going to change because of tension, and it's going to change because of your needle. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull these up and find out how many rows it's going to be. And then we'll get back and we'll start the other side. So I'll see you all in just a moment. Alright, so I went ahead and I already did the trim on this side. Originally I did the main body of the shirt in a 5.5 millimeter. So I did the border without thinking. The trim, the border, whatever you want to call it, without thinking in 5.5. Because a row is wider than a stitch. So it was causing everything to tighten in. So I upped it to 6.5 and started out with the simple stitch so that way we could get our base in and it wasn't much of a difference between the reverse stitch and the net stitch. And I did 7 rows, and I found the buttons I really wanted, and I measured, so I left it to where there was 1 row on each side. Works out great. So and it ended up being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 total rows. So on the 4th row, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the center row, is where we're going to end up stopping on this side. We're going to start the 4th row, and then we're going to start doing our splits for the buttonholes. I'm going to go ahead and get started pulling up my loops for my simple stitch to connect into the shirt. And this one started up here. This one's going to start down here. So what we're going to end up doing is leave yourself a good tail. So what you're going to do is you're going to find the first one and the last one and go to the middle one. That's the one you're going to start pulling up your loop in. And you're just going to start pulling up your simple stitch loops. And then do the return pass, and then do where you have 3 rows of reverse stitch done. And when I say 3 rows, this is what I should be expressing as a row. Let me get a little bit on here. Is you have, let me find a good pointer. Oh, I need a different color. So you have 1 puffiness, 2 puffiness, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're counting your puffies. 1, 2, 3. So after you have 3 puffies, 3 rows of puffies, that's when we're going to start doing our split. And then we'll do 1, 2, 3 more rows of puffies. And your last row of puffy is technically going to be it's going to be your return pass, and then you're going to do the bind off. That's going to create that last row of puffs for the reverse stitch. So we're going to do 3 full rows of puffies, and then we'll come back and do our opening gap for our buttons. And that is going to be that's going to be easy to do. It's just showing you how to do it. But I'll see y'all when we get ready to start doing our very first one. Alright, so what I did is I went ahead and I did my 4 rows. Technically 4, but I wanted the 3 rows of the puffiness from the reverse stitch. Because this row we just did, and we're about to skip, is going to be our center stitch. So I went ahead and I moved my stitch markers even up to where they were. I did that all the way down. And I know this buttonhole looks like it's going to be very close to the edge, but it's not, because you got to think we're going to have a good 2 inches more to go when we do the bottom. Now, how we're going to handle this? You can handle this in a few different ways, but you need to determine the size of your buttons. I've already built up a few rows and gauged. I did 3 because I like the even number. Well, to have 1 in the center and then 1 on each side, but that was too big for my button. The button would fall out and defeats the purpose of a button. So it's going to have to be 2. And how we're going to handle this is you're just going to start like you normally would with a reverse stitch, and then right before your stitch marker, the stitch before your stitch marker, which is for me is right here, and there's my stitch marker stitch. I'm skipping these 2. Now, when you skip a stitch, you need to yarn over so you can keep your stitch count. So we skip, that's that stitch. We yarn over 1 more time, and that's the stitch where the stitch marker's at. And then you go into the next stitch right after the stitch marker and continue the stitch pattern, which is the reverse stitch for us. And then you're going to do that until your next stitch marker. And like I said, if you have to build up a few rows to determine for your buttons, because you may want to use bigger buttons or smaller buttons, and you can. I did this reverse stitch in a lot looser of a tension because since we're working vertically, I didn't want it to pull in, and because I'd had that happen. So you just got to keep your tension and then just keep working up your stitches. But like I said, you can do a few rows after, and don't do the close off, but check the hole, see if it's big enough for your button. If it's not, it's easy to frog. I know a lot of people don't like frogging, but it's easy to frog a project than fudging a project. Sometimes you can fudge it, sometimes you can't. And a buttonhole is one of those you really can't fudge. unless you made the hole too big and you actually have buttons that'll cover that, then go for it. But if you don't, then, you know, what harm is it doing than you getting it accurate? So what we're going to do, again, one before and the one of. So yarn over and yarn over. For every stitch you're skipping, you have to do a yarn over. So we skipped 1 and 2. So 1 and 2. And then go into the next one right after and pull up your loop. And then again. There we go. And then just do this again and again and again. The tricky part is going to be on the return pass, because handling the yarn overs with the return pass sometimes can be a little tricky. Sometimes they get a little stiff on you or tighten down, but you need to show it who's boss and make him work for you, because it's your yarn. It should be working for you, not you working for it. So I'm going to continue working up and doing this, and remember, you're going to skip 1 before where you put your stitch marker and the one of your stitch marker, but when you're skipping, you're doing, for every stitch you skip, you need to account for it with a yarn over. So that way you keep your stitch count, you keep your spacing, and you're not compressing anything. You're not losing anything. I'll show you one more time, and then I will cut off, get to the end, and we'll show you how to handle the return pass with these yarn overs. One before and the one of, so yarn over for this stitch, yarn over for that stitch, and then go into the very next one afterwards and pull up your reverse. And that's it. So I will finish up, get to the end, and I will show you how to handle the return pass. Be back in just a moment. So I'm at the last stitch, doing my end stitch, pulling up my loop, chain 1, yarn over and pull through 2. And it's just a standard return pass. But here's the difference, is we're going to try to keep these all bunched up as much as we can, still keeping your tension loose or tight. However, it's going to fit with the stitch you're working with. Since we're working vertically, it needs to be pretty loose. Vertically on a horizontal piece. Otherwise, you're going to end up with something really tight. See, we're starting the yarn overs. So you're still going to just pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. And not split the yarn. And then yarn over and continuously pull through 2. And they're going to open, it's going to be like this until we start doing the stitch again. And that, for me, for my button size, is a little bit of a tight fit. It's tighter than it was, but it'll work. And then I'll be able to come in and maybe even, do some little sewing around it to keep it to where it doesn't fray. And that's what I'm going to do. But just go ahead and just do your standard return pass, watching out for those yarn overs. That way they don't slip on you. And then while you're building up your next row, you're going to go into 2 spots. One here, and they're the yarn overs, is where you're going to go into to pull up your loops. There and there. and they'll be very evident when you get there, and that's how you'll just close it back off again. But I'm going to see you when we get done with this, and then we'll start down here. So I'll see y'all here in just a moment. Okay, so we have both of our sides done. One where the buttons are going to go and the one with the buttonholes. So how we're going to do this next step is you're actually just going to start working in the sides of this trim. And you're going to just start pulling up your loops, and we are doing the reverse stitch. So you're going to want to do it still with everything with the outside, or so you're going to want to do it with the right side out, so everything facing you, so that way the stitch still comes out. But we're going to go ahead and get everything situated. So you're going to look at the very first chevron you have here, and that's where you're just going to pull up your loop. Leave a decent tail and just start pulling up your loops. And it's going to have to be loose again, like we did with the side panel trims, just because otherwise it'll start pulling it in and shrinking it, and we don't want that. And we're going to do 7 complete puffy rows. It's easier with the reverse stitch just to tell you how many puffy rows. So you'll do 6 puffy rows and have your return pass, and then you'll just do your close off, which will create your number 7 for the reverse stitch. But you're just going to do this and bring up all your loops in every spot, and keep it, like I said, keep it nice and loose. That way your tension stays the same and you're not making it tight to where it's going to bring the shirt in, and it actually gives it a really bad look. Now, since we already did a border here with the simple stitch, we're going to go ahead and just pull up our simple stitch loops, because we're going to do the row of simple stitch before we start anything else. And just do that. A row of simple stitch first, and then we will start the reverse stitch, and it's 7 puffs on the reverse stitch. That's just, like I said, it's a lot easier just to tell you puffs, simply because that's what this looks like. And you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You'll do 6 rows completed, 6 rows with 6 puffs. And on that 7th one, what's going to give you your puff is when you do your close off. And that's how we're going to do it here as well. So we'll get this done. Go ahead and I'll pull up your row of simple stitch all the way around to even here, and you'll pull up your loops like we just did here. And then we'll just come back, do your return pass, and then start building up and doing the reverse stitch. Here, when we come back here, we'll start doing the reverse stitch right away, because it's going to blend in. It's not going to look like the simple stitch. This will look like simple stitch, which is fine, because we did it here as well and here. So that is 100% fine. But I'm going to go ahead and pull this up and get this going and finish it up. And then we'll get onto the collar. I'll see y'all here in just a moment. Okay, so we finished our bottom border. And then now we're starting on our collar. Now how we're going to do our collar is we're going to do it with the open part away from us, because what we're going to do is we're doing a simple stitch. We're going to do the Tunisian simple stitch, and that way, because it's easier to do increases with the simple stitch and they keep them nice and smooth versus the other stitches. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to go into this very last loops that we have on our, where our buttons are going to go on the trim there, and you're just going to start pulling up simple stitch loops. I did switch back to a 5.5 for this part of it, so I'm just going to start pulling up my loops, and you can work them in there to where you have them at every interval, so that that way you're not compressing everything. Sorry, it's a little hard at this angle. Alright, now we're at where we made our simple border, I guess you could call it. So that way we could do this aspect with it. And you're just going to pull up all your simple stitch loops. Now yours are going to look different than mine because you're probably not going to use the same weight of yarn, the same needle size. But the basic premise is still the same. And if we can get the basic premise to stay the same, then the shirt's still going to turn out the same. So just, we'll pull up all these loops and then do a return pass, and then we'll start our increases. Now, your collar should roughly be about 4 inches. That's going to vary again because of yarn size. For me, that should be roughly about 11, between 11 and 12 rows. But how we're going to make the collar a point is we're going to be adding 2 increases. An increase at the beginning and an increase at the end. And we're going to do very simple increases. And again, the reason why I'm pulling these up in the simple stitch, because this is technically the back side of the collar. So when it lays down, it's going to look like this. The simple stitch, if you remember the backing of a simple stitch, it looks like that. So it'll still give us the play of the texture that the border has been giving us. So I'm going to finish up, get to the end, and do a return pass. When we get down to the end, I'll show you where you're going to need to put your needles so you can pull up your loops and you can keep everything on nice and snug. So I'll see you here in just a moment at the end. Okay, so we're coming up on the end where we're going to be starting our return pass here shortly. But I wanted to show you how we're going to handle this. So you have you pulled up all your loops. Then where we connected here, you're going to put a loop in there. And then you're going to split it because there's a little side there. That way it gives us enough room. And another one. And then go into that very first connector. And that is all we're going to do. You just connect them. So you'll chain 1 and then yarn over and then pull through 2 all the way down to the end. And when we get down to the end is when I'm going to show you how we're going to start doing our increases. And your increases, like I said, are going to take place at one at the beginning and one at the end. So that way we can get our collar points going on. and you're going to do that for roughly 3.5 to 4 inches. And if you want to keep going, make a bigger collar or smaller collar, go for it. You know, it's for you or for somebody you want to make it for. So, you know, it depends on what you want it to be. But I'm just giving you a blueprint to go by, so that way you can make the changes yourself of what you want. So I'm going to get down to the end, and then we're going to start our increases. So we'll do that for one row, and then we'll go off and do roughly about 11 or 12 rows, so that way I have my 4 inches, and then we'll do a bind off. So I'll see you in just a second. Alright, so we're at the end. Pull through. I got to pull that down a little bit because I got carried away there. And then tighten that. There we are. And we can fix that after we're ready. So how we're going to do this. For our increase, you're just going to go right through the gap like you were doing a full stitch, and then just start pulling up your simple stitches. That's it. We just increased it by 1. And you're going to do that when we get to the opposite side as well. So I will see you here in just a second at the end, so we can do the increase there, and I'll show you where to do it, so that way we can get our nice collar shape going on. So I'll see you in just a moment. Okay, so we're coming up towards the end now, and I'm going to show you how we're going to do this simple increase. It's a lot easier than you think. Okay, I'm going to pull up the last stitch, and you do this before you go into your close off. So instead of going in to do the row ending closure like we normally would, the end stitch, you're just going to go ahead and pull up another simple stitch or as a full stitch. You just increased. Now go ahead and do your normal enclosure stitch. Yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, chain 1. Now these two are going to get really close together, so you need to be careful. And then yarn over and pull through 2. And it's going to be that way down at the other end as well, and we'll show you here one more time. I'll show you here in just a moment when we get there. But that's how you're going to do your increase, and that's how you're going to make your collar, and you're going to do that for 3.5 to 4 inches. And that way you have a decent collar. This entire shirt is 100% Tunisian. I could have done this in double crochet if I wanted to, or single, you know, but I really didn't. I didn't want to. I wanted this entire shirt to be Tunisian. And going off the blueprint that Crystal over at Back a Day has given for it. So I just adjusted the blueprint for Tunisian. I'll see you here in just a moment at the end. Alright, we're coming through the end now. You're going to see what I'm talking about again. With these two being so close together, you got to be careful. You just go through the 2. Make sure you don't slip through and go through all 3. And then again, now we have, you can slowly see in our increase taking place. So what we're going to do is another full stitch. And it's going to be a little hard to see where to go. Let me open this out a little bit. But you have the end loop here, and then your very next loop here. You're still going to go in between and pull up your full stitch. and then continue your simple stitches. And it's going to be the exact same way on the other side. So we just go right on in, pull up a full stitch, and then go right there, shoot right back down and do your simple stitch. And we did another increase, and then simple stitch all the way back down till you get to the end stitch. And right before you do the end stitch, you're still going to do a full stitch, then do your end stitch. So that way you're adding 2 stitches every row, one at the beginning and one at the end, and that's going to give us our flare out for the collar. And you're going to do that for 3.5 to 4 inches, and then do your normal standard simple stitch row close off. And I'll see you when we get ready to start doing the row close off. So just remember, you got it when you get down to the end. Let's say this is the end. You'll just pull up a loop and then do your end stitch, and then come back like we did on the row previously. It's fairly simple, it's fairly easy, and it's a lot cleaner. Now, this is the bottom side of the collar, or the back side. So when we flip it down, it's going to give us the bump look that we were getting with the reverse stitch. And of course, you can use any stitch you want to use for this. Alright, I'll see y'all when we get done with our 4 inches of collar. Just remember, increase at the beginning, increase at the end, and continuously do the increases until you have your 3.5 to 4 inches of your collar. And then we'll do the row close off. Alright, I'll see y'all here in just a moment. Okay, so I'm pulling through the last few right now. So we're going to go ahead and just do our normal row closure, and you'll just pull up your loops everywhere there's a place, and it's Tunisian simple stitch slip stitch, and just pull it off. Pull up your loop and slip it off, keeping that 1 on your hook. And we'll do that all the way down, and then you'll tie it off, and then you can block, put your buttons on, and we will be done. So I'm going to go ahead and finish slipping all these stitches off. And then I will block it, put my buttons on, and then we'll come back and show the finished product of the shirt. So I'll see y'all here shortly. Alright, so after we got our buttons on, our shirt is done. It came out really, really nice. And the stitch is amazing on this. And that is it. After you get it blocked, you can start wearing it. And remember, folks, if you can give me a like and subscribe, it'd be greatly appreciated. And leave me a comment. I will chit chat with you. Now, with that being said, as always, folks, keep stitching.